Making a large terrarium can seem super difficult and complicated if it's your first time making one. However, I'm going to show you exactly how in the easiest way possible without having to use any expanding foam, silicone or cork panels for the background. For the build, I'm going to use this large fish tank my friend gave me that's 38 by 38 by 38 centimeters. It's a little scratched up, but it should work fine, and this is a great way to repurpose a fish tank if you want something that's much lower maintenance. I'm now going to add in lacquer into the bottom of the tank, as this will act as a drainage layer which will allow any extra water to drain out of the substrate so that it doesn't become too soggy. In a tank of this size, I wouldn't recommend using anything else in the bottom, otherwise it will become too heavy. Lacquer is the perfect medium as it's lightweight and super porous, and it also isn't too expensive, and you can get a 50-litre bag for around £30, but this will last you for multiple years of terrarium building. I will now take a piece of window screen mesh and measure it out over the top of the tank, where I can then cut it to size to ensure that it will correctly fit in the bottom. This will act as a barrier between the substrate and drainage so that they don't become mixed up over time. It also helps when planting, as sometimes you can disturb the lacquer too much and it will make its way to the surface where it will look out of place and get in the way, so doing this will keep it at the bottom. Straight on top of this, I'll add in some activated charcoal which can help keep the tank fresh and clean due to its purification properties. However, this can be skipped if you don't have any at hand or don't want to buy any. Straight on top of this, I'll add in the substrate, which is made from a mix of 1 part coir, 1 part sphagnum moss, 1 part akadama, 1/4 part worm castings and 1/4 part activated charcoal. I will add in more substrate that you can see here, but I'm starting with this as some of the hardscape will be sunk in around it. I'm going to start with these large pieces of ceria stone, which is what I'll use to build up the background of the tank. It's common to see people use expanding foam and cork panels for a typical background. However, because this setup is purely for plants, with the only inhabitants being springtails, I like to build up my backgrounds this way as it makes the tank far easier to take apart and switch around if I want to do a new setup. This way is much easier and quicker and can save you some money. If I were to add reptiles, like dart frogs for example, I would make sure to glue all of these pieces in place. Now that the core hardscape is in place, I can start positioning in some of the plants, starting with this bonsai tree which I want to be the focus of the setup. I'm trying some different positions here, but I ended up placing it on the middle left side of the tank where it fits well with the surrounding wood and naturally draws the eye's focus. I'll add substrate on top of the root to create a little hill for the bonsai to sit on. If you're familiar with the rule of thirds in photography, I'm applying the same method here where the focus of my setup is positioned on the left focal point, which will look far better than just slapping it in the middle. I'm going to break up the next plant into a few different pieces which I can then use to place behind some of the rock on the background. This helps create kind of a living wall in the back, giving the effect that the terrarium is expanding behind the plants but is out of sight. I'll top this off with some substrate to fill in the gap at the back so that the roots are completely covered. With this pile or palm, I'll do the same method, removing the soil from its roots and putting it in behind the rock at the back so that the leaves stick up and cover the background. Again, I'll add extra substrate to cover up the roots. The next plant is this cordyline, which I'll place next to the rock on the right side of the tank where I think it fits in nicely. I added in this extra rock at the back and I was going to use this air plant, however I ended up taking it out due to its colours clashing too much with the other plants. Going back to the floor of the tank, I'll make a hole for this alocasia to slot into, which has stunning leaves. Moving on to the smaller sized plants, I'll add this anglinema near the front here and brush substrate over its roots. I'll do something similar with this anthurium, which I hope will climb up the right side of the tank over time. Another great terrarium plant is a cryptanthus, which will slot in nicely on the left side of the driftwood. Notice how I'm making sure that none of the key plants are overlapping each other so that they're all visible from the front. Before moving on to the plant cuttings, I'm going to add some sand to the front, snaking under this rooty piece of driftwood, and this will add some colour contrast to the front of the terrarium and create a mini path. I also noticed this gap in the back where I wanted to add this peperomia to fill in the space. I'll now move on to plant cuttings which don't have any roots. To plant them, I'll simply slot the stem into the substrate. A lot of people may think they'll simply die, but terrariums provide the perfect condition for rootless propagation, as many plants will shoot roots directly out the stems in tropical conditions. I'm using the cuttings to fill out the bare substrate at the front of the terrarium. I actually made a small mistake here by using a cutting of string of pearls, which, as pointed out by a viewer in the comments last week, is a succulent and will not last in a terrarium. I completely forgot this when making my last few builds, so if you can think of anything else you do differently, or notice any other mistakes I make, please let me know and I'll pin the comment so that others can see too. This won't harm the terrarium overall, however, as it will simply be broken down by Springtails and the nutrients will be added back into the soil. In between my plant cuttings, I'm going to start adding in some mosses, which will spread and fill in the gaps over time. I'm using some aquatic species here, which I always have success with in tropical terrariums due to their high humidity. I'm also adding in a few local species of moss, which can tend to work well in terrariums, but I made sure to wash them down beforehand to remove any potential unwanted guests. The goal with these small plant cuttings is to give the terrarium a sense of scale where the larger plants like the bonsai appear bigger with the context of the tiny plants surrounding it. By doing this, you can create a kind of mini world effect, and this will separate your builds from looking thrown together to looking complete. Adding in these tiny plants also join together gaps between the large ones to help the terrarium feel whole and not missing any points. With this oak leaf creeping fig, I'll place some straight into the moss and also mount some straight onto the wood by using damp sphagnum moss as a growing medium. I'll also add some to the edge of the sand path where it will hopefully blend things together and give it more of a border. I'll finish now with the final plant cuttings, which are the smallest we'll get, and these will hopefully root and grow in over time. The final step of the building is to add some smaller stones, which will give some context to the giant ones in the back. By adding these in, it will help blend the front into the rest and help the stones appear larger at the back. It's important to use stones of the same colour when doing this, so it looks like they're of the same type. I'll use some even smaller ones in the sand area and sprinkle some on the moss on the right. By adding them into this crack in the back, it looks like they're falling out of the cliff in a loose area of rock. I can now give everything a thorough spray with deionized water. You can also use rainwater or distilled water, and if you really have to, tap water will work. The issue is, it can introduce unwanted impurities that can harm the plants in the setup. However, I am skeptical of how much this actually affects terrariums, so I may need to do some experimenting soon to see if it actually makes a difference in mine. I'm also going to wipe down the front of the glass with tissue to remove the excess water and any substrate that may have fallen on it so that we can see it clearly. The final step is to add in Springtails, which will feed off decaying plant matter and add nutrients back into the soil. They are also very important in a large setup like this with lots of wood, as they will prevent mold outbreaks, which are almost certain without them. I'm super happy with how this build turned out, and I love how it's all come together now that it's all finished up. I will update you with how it gets on the community tab on my channel, so stay posted for that. I also did add a lid on top of this made out of acrylic, which I got at Simply Plastics online. However, I forgot to record this, so you're just going to have to imagine. A lid is very important to keep the water cycle of the terrarium going, so this cannot be missed out. If you enjoyed this video, click on this one next, which should appear on screen, as this is a much smaller bowl terrarium, which may be a better place to start if you feel like this tank is far too large.